Hi, Anne Marie. I oh, so I figured out what I did wrong yesterday with the interpreting your picture. You have to be on camera to be spotlighted, and so that
Oh,
was the
did you mean to start recording already? You're recording now.
no. Oh, I will stop that. Okay, everybody is being admitted, and I will go on mute.
Welcome back, everyone. I am going to get us started right away so that we don't miss any time during this workshop. Thank you for joining us. We are here to discuss Why Culture Matters, a presentation by Samantha Salamon, providing advocacy to immigrant and refugee sexual violence survivors. Samantha Salamon is the managing attorney and manager of the OAESV Department in Asian Services in Action, Incorporated. In 2017, Ms. Salamon began representing DVSA and HT victims as Asia's staff attorney and was promoted to OAESV manager in 2018. As of this year, Ms. Salamon was again promoted as the managing attorney for the agency, along with still managing the OAESV department. She holds a bachelor's degree in social work with minors in Middle Eastern Studies and in Arabic, and a law degree from Cleveland State University, Cleveland Marshall College of Law. She has a passion for assisting vulnerable populations and believes that personal growth occurs most when working to help others. After living and working abroad as an attorney in Dubai, Ms. Salamon understands the struggle an individual faces when dealing with unfamiliar cultural experiences and aspires to help people to the best of her ability to obtain and protect their legal rights. She works closely with the Ohio Attorney General's Human Trafficking Initiative, being the co-chair of the Legal and Legislative Subcommittee, and facilitating the Labor Trafficking Subcommittee. Furthermore, Samantha is a leading culturally specific trauma-informed subcommittee of the Linking Systems of Care to Ohio's youth program. And lastly, she is a member of both the Cleveland Metropolitan and the American Bar Associations. We are so honored to have you here, Samantha. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. I also have a co-host here, Monicah, who is going to be presenting with me as well. Kendra, did you get her bio as well?
I did not handy. Do you want to introduce her a bit?
Sure, not a problem. So I am honored.
I apologize, Monicah. We're honored to have you.
So I am honored to be presenting this with Monicah Yonghang, who is here with me. Monicah is a bilingual advocate from the Ahimsa Department at Asian Services in Action. She's been with us for about 3 to 4 years or so, if my memory serves me correctly. She is actually Nepali by ethnicity, and so she helps us significantly with our Nepali refugee and other immigrant survivors of sexual assault in our Akron location. So Monicah is going to bring a much more cultural perspective to this presentation, along with some other knowledge that she's gained in her experience thus far. All right, so everyone, things are going to be a little difficult today because I am going to force you to learn some new things. First and foremost, from an administrative perspective, we are going to be utilizing a platform called Pear Deck. And for those of you that have never used Pear Deck before, you actually have to, I'm going to be sending you guys a website and a passcode. Once you go into that website and passcode, you're going to be following along. It's an interactive website that we're going to be using to help kind of engage people a little bit more throughout this presentation. So if you can look in the chat, I am sending the website and the passcode right now. So if you could please go to that, and then we can start momentarily. I'll give everyone a minute or so to join that. For those of you that have just gotten on, we're going to be utilizing the platform of Pear Deck for this presentation. So please look in the chat. I have inserted the website and the passcode so that you can start joining us. We have about 10 people that are signed on, and we have about 30 people who are here. So I'll give it another minute or so to help everyone sign on. So we haven't had any issues in trying to sign on from a Google perspective. We'll see if anyone else is having, can you try redoing it, Rachel? Just typing it again, see if you can get through it. All right, we have about 17 people in there. All right, well, I'm glad, Beatrice, you got it up. I don't know if anyone else is having issues. We're still having only 17 people sign in. What I can do is I will share my screen. If you are unable to join the Pear Deck, you won't be able to actively interactively engage. But you can also just use the chat. Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. You can also use a different browser, so you don't have to use a Google password. All right, we do have a lot of material, so I do want to start going forward. I will share my screen though, for those of you that are not able to join. So if you guys can give me. All right. So let us begin. So thank everybody for coming to our presentation today and understanding how to competently work with immigrant and refugee survivors of sexual violence. So as with that lovely introduction, my name is Samantha Salamon. I am going to be the co-host today with my colleague. I'm the managing attorney at Asian Services in Action. Monica, you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name is Monicah Yonghang. I am a bilingual advocate in the OAESV department at Asian Services in Accent, and I've been with Asia for a little bit over 3 years. My native language is Nepali.
So just to give a little bit of background of understanding Asian services and action, I want to shorten this part up because we're running a little bit behind, but essentially we're in this year is our 25th anniversary of opening. We were developed from 4 Chinese women that came together and recognized that the immigrant and refugee community in Northeast Ohio needed assistance in understanding how to adequately live in the US, how to do things like pay taxes, how to help when you need childcare, how to get access to public benefits. The whole purpose of Asia, we have this ongoing theme of self-sufficiency. And so you'll see that throughout understanding Asia and what we do and all the services that we provide to our clients. So we have 8 different departments at Asia, and I've listed them out here. As you can tell, there's a drastic range from our legal services to our federally qualified health center and to working with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking.
So ahimsa is the Sanskrit word where it means like nonviolence, peaceful, loving, and ahimsa serves like an individual with like immigrant and refugee background, like sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking. So ahimsa provide quality, culturally and linguistically appropriate information, health and service, social service to those individuals. So ahimsa's advocacy services are like free and confidential. And ahimsa has like a 2-part, like where one is advocacy and the other one is the legal part. Advocacy where we help client like get benefit, help them file apply for benefit, like language assistance we provide if they don't speak like English, like crisis hotline, like safety planning, like emergency shelter referrals, counseling support system, like support group, like those are the advocacy services that we provide to sexual assault survivors that comes to us. So, and then for the legal part, we have 2 attorneys on staff who represents this individual with their direct victimization. Um, like Sam is one of them, and they help obtain like a protection order, like immigration assistance, like family law, divorce, custody, and juvenile. I think off you go, Sam.
All right. So on everyone's screen, you're going to see a screen called objectives. So the idea is we have 3 different objectives that we would like to accomplish throughout this presentation. The first objective is dealing with understanding various immigration terms and statuses and how they impact the services that we provide to our clients. Objective 2 is dealing with barriers that agencies are facing when they are working with immigrant or refugee survivors. And we're going to add a case study into that to see how it all works out. And then objective 3 is dealing with best practices. How can we create best practices in our own agency for when a survivor from immigrant or refugee community comes to us and asks for our help? So as you can tell on your Pear Deck, you can see this green little thumbs up. What I would like everyone to do is I would like everybody to identify which objective you're most interested in. That we want to make sure that we're spending time for everybody here for the objectives that are appealing to everybody. So if everybody can move their little thumb to figure out what objectives you'd like to focus more on, you'll be able to kind of move it around a little bit. Seeing a lot of movement here. All right. Give everyone another few seconds. All right, so for those of you that are using Pear Deck, here are your responses for everybody. So it looks like more people are or want to learn a little bit more about best practices, what they can do in their own agency that's going to help them work with the immigrant refugee survivors. So we'll make sure that we're going to be focusing a little bit more on those. All right, moving on. So one thing that we want to do is we want to understand who's in the room, and we want to understand what your experience has been thus far in working with an immigrant or refugee survivor. So those of you that are using that are using Pear Deck, you can just actually click on that link right there that's on here. Or what you can do is you can text Amanda Smith 841 to 22333 to answer our poll question that we have here. I'm not seeing any responses. I think the poll was locked because you tried to, I just pressed present. So maybe try again. Let me see if I can try presenting it again. There we go. All right. We have a good diversity group here of people's experience in working with the immigrant and refugee communities. All right. Let us move forward into learning a little bit more on how to work with survivors from the immigrant and refugee communities. Go ahead, Monica.
Okay, so we talked about like a refugee and immigrant individual. So, what is that? Like, those individuals have like their own cultures and identities, like, and each individuals that come to us have, different cultures. So what is you guys can enter into the chat what you think about like a culture, so for me, like a culture is like there is like there's like a different language, spoken in like even in the same country, there's different ethnic groups people lives. It's like I'm from Nepal, like that doesn't mean like Nepal only speaks like a one language, like which is Nepali. So each ethnic group speaks like a different languages. So and then we have our own, like each ethnic groups have their own cultures and rituals and traditions and food and languages. So those all considered like a one, culture. So culture can be very complicated, if you don't understand. So it is very important to understand like a culture, like when we're dealing with immigrant and refugee individuals, sexual assault survivors. So this is like a cultural wheel, the cultural wheel where like what is culture, like culture could have like food and drinks, of course, you know, like for me, like for example, like I'm from this like a tribe, like where my food is specifically known for just for my tribe, you know, my ethnicity, like our ethnic group people. And then, but if you step out of the ethnic group, there's another culture where they have their own food, you know, that's part of their culture and stuff like that. So um, culture is like a very complicated and also very like very fascinating if you know, if you try to like learn about more, you know, different cultures. um, so
So as you
okay,
can
and
see
then
from the culture wheel, culture is very complicated. There's a lot of aspects to it.
yeah,
When people think of culture, they think of, oh, just someone from a different part of the world. But it's much more complex than that. In the US, we have multiple different cultures. For example, when you go to the South, there's such thing called Southern comfort food. It's from the South. It's a cultural aspect. It's a type of food that they have. So culture doesn't necessarily just mean your skin tone or where you're from, where your ancestors are from. There's a lot more to it. And these are all, everything on this culture wheel are things that you have to take into consideration in determining an individual's culture and what is going to help, what's going to influence them in making decisions that they're going to make.
thank you for adding that, Sam. So these are some like a culture notes on culture, like so culture is like just more than one ethnicity, like I said you know, earlier, like, you know. So I'm from Nepal, like there are so many ethnic groups, like each ethnic groups has their own identities and own ritual things that they practice, they do. So like, you know, just don't, you know, just consider that, you know, I'm from Nepal doesn't mean, and like doesn't, you know, doesn't mean like you know, individual that you see of another, like another individual you see from Nepal practice the same cult, you know, like practice the same religion and stuff like that, you know. Just be kind of open-minded and like, you know, ask question, like, you know, like don't assume that, you know, all Nepali people speak the same language. I know like Nepali is like national language, but like we also have other like language. Ethnic groups have their own language. So so power dynamic of the dominant culture. So like usually like I can only talk about my culture, like, you know. So that means like, you know, in Nepal, like a man, they consider themselves as like, you know, it's like usually male dominant country. It's getting a little bit better, but it's still like people who practice like a male should be a god, and you know, we should obey like their order and stuff like that. So, and the male has more power, like male works male has like great job, and the women stay home and do just household chores and stuff like that. So that is that. And then there is also like a caste system that Nepali people like Nepal, oh my goodness, sorry. There's also a caste system that that we do in Nepal, like, so the higher caste people, like, you know, like have usually like a better opportunity, better like, you know, they can do whatever they want, they have more power. And then there's like one kind of like really weird thing, like they still practice in Nepal, is where lower caste people, when they cook food, the higher caste people don't eat that, like even like a drinks, they don't take a drink from like lower caste people hand, because you know, that's part of the culture. And I know it's not right, but they still do practice that. So, you know, so there's like a power dynamic and dominant culture. So like all ethnic groups have that unique culture and identities, just like I mentioned about, like, you know, each ethnic group had their own culture and they identify with specific, you know, things that they do in the ethnic group. So um, so acknowledgement and a latitude of operation, just like, you know, man is always supposed to be up here, you know, and then woman's always below them, like, you know, the what all the people follow, women's usually follow like what men's tell you to do and stuff like that. So that's that, like, you know, the culture that I come from. So all cultures have like a gender norms, like, like that also touch base on the one that I talked before, like, so in my culture, like usually women are basically like you stay home, like, take care of the kids and serve husband, and usually men go work outside and make money. That's it. So like, you know, they believe that women should be just, like raised this way, or like women should act this way, like that. So it's very important to understand cultures, like when you're interacting or like, serving immigrant and refugee individuals, because, if you recognize this kind of like their cultures, then you have some ideas like how to, best serve these individuals. So culture can provide like a resilience and pride, as well as the reinforced patriarchy, like, and fear. So yeah, it could be like bad and good. Like sometimes cultures can be good, and then again, culture can be bad, like, So do you have anything to add, Sam?
I think the one thing I would like to add is we cannot, as service providers, be individuals who are judgmental of a particular culture. We can't go in saying that your culture is wrong, because that's disrespectful. That's not going to help a survivor. But the key is that we need to understand it. Because if we don't understand it, we can't appreciate what that survivor is actually going through and assist them in getting out of that situation. So now we understand a little bit more about culture, but one key aspect that we need to understand when we're working with immigrants or refugees who are survivors of sexual violence is you have to appreciate and understand their immigration stuff. What the heck is going on with immigration? Now, I do not want to have a legal lecture to everybody here. I don't think that's why you came. But that being said, it is important to have a basic understanding of these terminologies and understand why we keep saying immigrant and refugee survivors, because that's important as well. So before you can help an immigrant or refugee survivor, it's important to understand how that individual came to America if they were born here. Remember, it's always an option that they might have been born here, making them US citizens. But a lot of the times it's not that situation. So I listed here the more common ways an individual from the immigrant or refugee community came to the US. These are, again, what most people know. So you could be a visitor or on a tourist visa here, which means that you came here to visit for one reason or the next. You could be a refugee here, which is somebody that's fleeing their home country and they're seeking refuge here. You could be on a student visa here, meaning you weren't planning on being here long term, but just for education purposes. You can be on a marriage or a fiance visa. You can be here on a family-based visa. You can be here as an investor, or you can come here for employment purposes. Now, that's a lot. And unfortunately, I am going to go through them and I'm going to define these terms because it's important in being able to understand how to help survivors and what's going to actually be most beneficial for them. So first and foremost, various definitions. I'm not expecting everybody to memorize these definitions. I didn't even write them out, because the idea is I want you just to have a basic understanding of the differences, because I'm not expecting you to be immigration attorneys after this. But understanding some basic differences is important. The first one is immigrant. I keep saying that term immigrant. And what that means is an individual that purposefully came to the US to stay here for either for good or for a long period of time. That was their intention. You might hear this term alien, which sounds so dehumanizing, and it is. But unfortunately, under the law, that is what the US government calls individuals that are not US citizens here. They're identified as aliens to the government. Now, another term I keep saying is refugee, which, as I stated before, is an individual that came to the US that's fleeing their home country. Sometimes they don't choose to come to the US, but the US is the place that they were designated to be. And that's a key important factor to think about. Everyone has this idea in their head that everybody wants to come to the US and they chose to come to the US. That's not the case all the time, especially for refugees. There is asylum or asylee. Those are individuals who sought asylum. These are individuals that came to the US and they are afraid of going back to their home country. So they're asking the US government to stay here. The next thing, which was a very common phrase the past few years, is called family-based immigration. This essentially means that you received a visa from a family member. And this visa could be from various different family members, but that's how you received your immigration status. The next definition is lawful permanent resident. These are individuals that have green cards and they're allowed to be in the US lawfully and work in the US. The next one is a green card. The green card is the document that allows a lawful permanent resident to stay in the US. Then we have a conditional permanent resident, is somebody who's here on a 2-year green card. We have a visa, which is a document that is allowing people to actually be here. Different types of visas. There's a work visa, a student visa, or a fiance visa. Then there is the understanding of an immigrant versus a non-immigrant. An immigrant is an individual that is here because they want to be here and they have the intent of staying here. A non-immigrant is somebody who came here that's only here for a period of time. Then these are the last, sponsorship is someone that's helping you stay here financially. And then the diversity visa or the lottery, which a lot of people say, identify it as, this is, again, a draw of a hat. It's winning a lottery and being able to stay in the US. That's exactly what it is. And then last but not least is the terminology of overstay versus undocumented individuals. Overstay are individuals that came to the US lawfully, but they overstayed the amount of time they're allowed to be here. And undocumented individuals are people who came to the US and they did not go through proper security to come here. I'm trying not to bore you guys to death, but these are important definitions to understand. So understanding, now that you have a little bit more definitions of some of the statuses an individual can have, here is what they can look like. This is the actual names of them. So you can be a refugee, you can be a green card holder or a lawful permanent resident. You could be a conditional permanent resident. You can be an asylee. You can be a visitor. You can be undocumented, or you could be identified as an international student. So these are actual statuses that one could have while they are here. So one key thing that I would like to note, though, for those of you that have never worked with or who have seldomly worked with the immigrant or refugee communities, A lot of clients are afraid to talk about their immigration status. They are afraid because they are terrified of being deported. Anything that you write down about identifying an individual's immigration status, unfortunately, that all can be used against that survivor should they ever end up in immigration court. So I know we all are thinking, well, what about privilege? What about privilege? They can subpoena these things, and unfortunately, privilege only goes so far to a certain extent. And this is something that everyone needs to be understanding of when working with this community, is that there is a risk when you are working with them and that we might be putting them in. So moving forward and understanding some best practices when working with an individual that's from the immigrant and refugee communities. It is absolutely imperative to understand that most of these individuals will need some type of immigration legal assistance. They might not know it and they might not understand it, but it is something that is really important to just keep in the back of your mind. Also, understand that deportation is always a concern, particularly when there is such thing as criminal legal advocacy taking place. So there was at one point a directive from the federal government whereby if somebody who is undocumented was in a court setting, they could be taken into custody should it be found that they are undocumented. This is a scary reality for a lot of our communities. So we need to be aware of that when we're working with them. We also need to be aware that public benefits may have a negative impact on their immigration status. I know a lot of us assist clients in getting some type of public benefits, but you might be doing it to their detriment and not understand. So it is important to be careful with what we're doing. Also, immigration is a way that a lot of abusers use to have power over their victims. If you are undocumented and the abuser knows you're undocumented, that makes you vulnerable because they can just make a call and you might be getting deported, which will hinder a lot of people from wanting to come forward. But lastly, there are protections that do exist when individuals are victims of crimes. And these protections can be utilized if they are brought to the attention of an immigration attorney promptly. So it is extremely important, if you haven't learned yet, that working with the immigrant and refugee community, understanding immigration law is extremely important, even if it is just the basics. This might bring hesitancy, or it might make survivors fearful of wanting to disclose their status to any service provider that's helping them. There is also important for best practices to have some type of an express policy within your agency as it pertains to working with ICE or Immigration Customs Enforcement. What do you do if ICE walks through your door and they're looking for one of your clients who is a survivor? This is something that should be policy within your agency. And it is very important when you're safety planning with clients. Understanding what their threats might be is extremely important. And again, just when it comes to just providing appropriate and safe services to survivors, you don't necessarily want to get a protection order for an undocumented individual, as that might bring them to court, which might subject them to being deported or detained. These are issues that we face every day when we're working with survivors. It's a weighing act, it's a balancing act that we have to keep thinking about with every decision that we make. And what's most important is, if you don't know, that's okay. It's a good thing. But you do need to contact an immigration attorney to help advise what is the best course of action from an immigration perspective for your client. And now I talk a lot, so I'm going to hand it off to Monicah to talk about some barriers.
Thank you. So now we understand that the basic of immigration issue that our clients face. So now let's learn about, like, additional barriers that service agency face when we working with immigrant and refugee individuals or sexual assault survivors. So next please. Thank you. So these are some general barriers that service agency face when working with immigrant and refugee sexual assault survivors. So, like, if you start to see, like, individuals with the immigrant and refugee background, does your agency like provide like a language access? Like, that's very important, because most of the like refugee and immigrant individuals, they don't speak English. So it is very important that your agency have this access, to like language access to this individual. So that way they can communicate with you. So like immigration status, like Sam said, if sexual assault survivors is undocumented, what is your, policy at age, what is your agency's policy reporting to, like, like ICE? Like, you don't want to, like put him or her into risk, because you don't want to re-traumatize or, victimize again. So like access to transportation, like, does your agency located at the bus line? If not, like, do you get a funding for, like, bus, Uber, Lyft, etc.? Like, most of these immigrant and refugee survivors, they don't have they don't have, like, they are, some of them are usually new, some of them, they don't have a control, over like the car or finance and stuff like that. So these are the things that you guys, like service agency needs to consider, like, because here pretty much in America, me as an immigrant, um, like, it's already hard for us to understand about the U.S. system. He was law and U.S. culture, but individual who, like, whose power is taken by their perpetrator, it's already there. So many layers of barriers or issue. So issue. So like so in regards to like US system, like, these individuals have no idea about, like, what is crime, like what they're going through, like what their perpetrators been putting, through, is that a crime? They have no idea about, like, if that's a crime or not. So, and like, how does, like, the criminal justice system works here in the US? So it is very important to understand that, like, don't assume that they know what is crime, because most of our clients that we serve here, they have no idea about it. So and then like a cultural differences. So like, does your agency, it's very important to we've been talking about the culture thing. So any individuals that come to your agency and asking for help, there could be like so many cultural differences that your agency, like, you there could be so many different like, oh my goodness, sorry. um so cultural difference, like, like, understand about, like, where that individual comes from, and try to consider that, like, that could be a cultural issue. So maybe like, if your agency can provide cultural trainings to staff, so they have some, you know, ideas about like helping immigrant and refugee individuals. And we're going to talk more about like a cultural humility like later, but like, you know, does your agency provide like practice cultural humility? And then like limited resources for immigrant and refugees. So most of our client, like they come to us, they don't even know how to write or, you know, read in their own language. So make sure, you know, some of them like do, but like they don't know how to read in English. So some individuals can read only in their native language. So it's, you know, very important that agents, you know, service agency provide like a translated material so they can understand. And, you know, so these are some barriers that agency face. Next slide, please. Um, So when it comes to like sexual assault survivors reporting or reaching out for help, like what are some barriers like, you know, like service agency face? You know, there are like cultural barriers that obviously culture plays a big role in these immigrant refugee individuals, you know. So like a reporting, sometimes like culture in some certain culture, like uh, they don't even back in their home, they have never gone to police to report this kind of, you know, like a sexual violence stuff, like because that could be considered in a culture like, you know, you don't do that kind of stuff, you know. So if husband beats you up, like, you know, that's, as a wife you're supposed to, you know, just deal with it, that's nothing. So it's very important to understand, like, you know, like there could be cultural barriers if the individual don't want to report to police, or if or like, you know, calling for police, how and where to, you know, report it, because they're basically like if you're helping with, you know, how to make a police report, you basically have to like, you know, walk them through it step by step, because there's already language barriers, transportation issues, and, you know, and they might be like terrified of police, because, you know, because how they knew as a police, you know, it could, you know, like Trump, it could put them in, you know, like it could traumatize them. I'm sorry. Like a hospital for safe exam, like, you know, plan B, like most of our culture, especially in my culture, like plan B is like, there's, you know, they don't consider like that as like okay option. That's like, you know, because culture in my community or in my culture, like family reputation or you know, it's a big deal. So if, for example, if I, you know, do abortion or take plan B and somebody found out in my community or in my culture, so my you know, that's, that is very like a, you know, no thing. So I will be putting my family into kind of like a risk, or my family reputation is like, you know, gone, and we don't want that. So just, you know, if something like sex assault survivor, like if client gets raped and get pregnant, you know, and then, you know, there are ways to, you know, talk with that, you know, offer some option, you know, and to consider that culture also a barrier, culture could be also a barrier. So aftercare and healing, like how, like, you know, if client get raped and got raped, so most of the culture that, you know, most of the culture, for example, like Nepali culture, I would not be as, if, for example, if I'm like a sexual assault, you know, victim, I will not be able to come, you know, forward and like ask for help, like because I worry about how my culture view me as a, you know, like a, like like how cultural oh my goodness, I'm I'm everywhere, sorry. um because, and then family pressure, if I get raped, for example, like, and then my family, because they only look for that, you know, the family reputation, they don't, you know, most of the people, they don't care about their daughter or daughter-in-law, or, you know, get raped, because they only, you know, because of the culture. And then so sexual assault between husband and wife, like most of the culture, again, like, so they have no idea. Most of our you know survivor, they have no idea if it's it's not okay that if you don't want to have sex with your husband, they think it's a part of husband thing, that's okay. They have no idea about it. So so it's educating about, if you don't feel like to have sex with your husband, it's okay. And then sexual assault and domestic violence are taboo. We don't talk about this kind of thing, this kind of things, because as a woman, you deal with it basically. So Sam, I will let you talk about the religious barrier.
Sure. So on top of understanding some cultural barriers, one aspect of culture is your religion, is your faith tradition, your spirituality. And so understanding that in and of itself might also have an impact on various aspects of advocacy services we can provide for them. So for example, it's very common for a lot of our survivors to hesitate in reporting for the fact that what happened within their family or what happened within their community is a community concern, or it's a family concern. It's not dealing with outsiders, and we shouldn't involve outsiders. So your next question is probably like, well, then what the heck do we do? How do we help them? That's a very good question. And the answer is you need to be creative. You need to think and understand what is appropriate for them. What is this individual's sense of justice, and how can you help them accomplish it? For example, there's a lot of survivors that practice a religion that would prohibit a safe exam, that would not allow them to get a safe exam, or let alone plan B. And these are things that, we face this in America. We have individuals that are from religions that do not believe in these things, and it's no different. We just have to make sure that we're asking questions and that we're aware that these might be aspects of their life, of their culture, that are stopping them or directing them to make a decision. And then furthermore, one big barrier that we face in working with survivors is, when it comes to legal assistance, is to divorce a perpetrator if their perpetrator is a spouse of theirs. Many cultures or many religions prohibit you from getting a divorce, or you can only get a divorce in certain circumstances. So how do we best assist these individuals when they're in this type of situation? So one caveat or one note that I would like everyone to understand is sometimes it's very difficult to understand what is a cultural barrier, as in what is more of a traditional barrier for them versus what is a more religious barrier. And understanding and distinguishing them two are very important, because that can go about in understanding how influential and how personal some of these barriers might be to a survivor. So the big issue that we've all been dealing with for the past year or so is COVID-19. And then more recently, acts of racism for the AAPI community. So first and foremost, before I go any further, I'm a big person with definitions. So let me define what the AAPI community actually is. That is identified as the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. So let's break that down even further. Who are identified as Asian Americans? Better yet, what is the continent of Asia consist of? Many people think when you think of Asian Americans, you think of Chinese individuals. That's the stereotype. But Asian Americans, Asia technically does include the Middle East as well. It does include India. It does include Nepal and Burma and Bhutan. There's a bunch of different countries, as well as China, that Asian American community actually encompasses. So, and unfortunately, we've been seeing how the ignorance of understanding what the Asian American and Pacific Islander knowledge of their background actually is in recent racist attacks that have been occurring. There have been shootings and public attacks of individuals from the AAPI community. There was like a month and a half ago, there was a woman that was attacked right outside a business, and there was a security guard just watching. There are hate crimes that are occurring, thinking that COVID-19 is the sole responsibility and liability of the AAPI community. And unfortunately, they're feeling it, which is not accurate. The person that's standing next to you that might be from the community, they themselves did not bring COVID-19 to America. But yet that is how a lot of them are being portrayed right now in our community. Then looking at COVID-19, again, the different types of individuals that are being targeted and what they're being targeted. Besides racial slurs and, again, the attack that they're facing going to the supermarket and buying groceries or just walking around. So why is that related? Why are we bringing this up here? This is slowing and hindering a lot of survivors from these communities from wanting to come forward. Not only might they be fearful of immigration issues, now they're fearful of, again, possible racial motivated attacks. Resources might not necessarily be as available or willing to provide services to them. Now, whether that's accurate or not is a different story. But a lot of individuals are feeling this pressure. This is trauma on top of another trauma. People are trying to simply learn and deal with everyday situations on top of being a survivor of sexual violence. There's employment issues, which could lead to financial constraints from our survivors. And again, a lot of immigrant communities and refugee communities live close to each other. They do that as a survival. They want to be with people that they know, that they can communicate easily with, that can understand them. But what does that mean when you're working with a survivor and you're trying to get them away from their abuser? How do you help that situation? And then on top, bring the complexity of what COVID-19 has done to the AAPI community. Monica?
Okay, so we talked about like a general barriers and also like barriers that service agency face. So how do we overcome like barriers? So first of all, we have to identify like what are the barriers, and then identify at your agency. So if you're interacting with the individuals, so and find out like what background and and what are the barriers, so and then that you can go from there. So it's important to identify the barriers first. So and then practice like a cultural humility, like if you're not interacting with these individuals, you know so and then you start to get more like immigrant and refugee individual sexual assault survivors, just that gets in your mind like, oh, we're getting more clients from different backgrounds. So maybe like like you can do like attend trainings, like a culture specific trainings where you can get some ideas, or reach out to cultural specific like agencies, like individuals, or to gain more knowledge, like ask questions, if you don't know, or if you haven't exposed to, like reach out to who knows, who can provide like a culture specific, services, or reach out to individuals, or reach out to different communities to let them know, let the survivor know that, the services are available to them, because it's very important, because the individual, like immigrant and refugee sexual assault survivor, they're already very vulnerable. They have like most of them, they don't speak English, and then and finally she has the courage to go ask for help, and then to your agency, and if you turn them down, there's no hope. So but if you reach out to different communities, and then like let them know there there could be services available for you, so that will give that individual hope. So, and maybe like gather some information and resources that immigrant and refugee may need, before meeting with this individual, like gather some information. So like I speak card, like with Asia here, we use I speak card. We give this to individual who don't speak English, and we have their language written on the back of their card, and they can give it to, like if they happen to go to police station to make a police report, they can use that, they can show that card, and then they can provide that language. So, or maybe translated materials, so if the individual can't read English, like provide, it's it's important that we have a material that's translated into their language, so they can understand. um, so reach out to like other agencies for ideas and technical assistance to be more inclusive. So I mean, nobody knows, like because this, so that's why it's reaching out and asking for help, or like it's always better way to like overcome the barriers. So if not me, some other person may know. So asking questions, reaching out is the first step that we do. So utilize agency platform to promote anti-racism and anti-discrimination. So users, social media agencies website to like about like it's not okay, all Asian or all African like immigrants should have equal rights, those kind of stuff, like so it's very important that those are the like um these are the some of the things that we can consider, how consider when we're working with immigrant refugee sexual assault survivor.
And again, the idea is we need to break down our barriers to open up our doors. I guarantee every single one of you guys that's on this phone or on this webinar right now genuinely do care and you want to help. You just might not know how to. So the idea is trying to make your place, your agency or your office or whatever it may be, more inclusive, more open to working with this community. Because it's not very common for our community to be going online and looking up rape crisis centers. They don't do that. Everything is word of mouth. And if they know somebody that went with, that worked at your agency or had worked with someone from your agency and they had a positive experience, that's how we get our name across. And that's how we help these communities in a way that's going to be beneficial for them. So now that we have learned a bunch about culture, about immigration, about some barriers, let's look at a case study and input that, figure out how we can actually help it in an actual case.
So this is the client of mine that I've been helping her with, like, so for the confidential reason, like I put like we just used like a client A. So client A took part in a cultural ritual at a family member's house. When client was supposed to be taught how to be a woman, client A was sexually assaulted during this time and was told by the family member that it was part of the ritual. So when her husband found out about this, he was very angry, and when she refused to have intercourse with him, he accused her of being a lesbian. The government told her if they got one more report, they would throw her in jail. So, like we talked again, like Sam mentioned, we talked about like barriers, cultural difference, and like religious difference and stuff like that. Um, like what issues like do we see here? Like if everybody can respond.
We have some members in the chat talking about religious barriers and family barriers. Patriarchal family. Everyone is blaming her.
Yes.
Cultural barriers. Yep, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Fear for the victim.
Mhm.
Homophobia. That's a very good one. Fear of the government. Yeah, these are some awesome responses because they are very relevant here.
Yeah.
So then moving forward in this case,
So for part two, like a client fled to the US to get away from the perpetrator and has overstayed her visitor's visa. So we talked about like visitor visas and overstayed stuff like that already. So client is currently staying at a shelter, but the shelter can no longer provide her services. So this is very concerning, right? As
so in your opinion, out of all these issues that we're dealing with, what is the most important issue to handle first? It's
so
kind of
we're seeing
hard.
different- So we're seeing different responses.
We have someone in the chat saying ask
Yeah.
the client what they're concerned with.
Mhm. I would also report the shelter, on the chat box.
That providing immigration or providing services should be irregardless of what the immigration status actually is. It's interesting because I feel that depending upon who you are and what your background is, will depend upon what's going to be the most important issue to deal with. But I do think that make comment about what's important to the client is also something that we have to take into consideration here in what is going to be most important for that individual as well. All right. So we're moving forward now that we've seen an actual case study, how complicated it might be. Let's understanding some best practices of what we could do as an individual and as an agency to help working with immigrant and refugee survivors. All right, so I got another poll question for everybody. You can either click on this poll question or you can again text to 22333 our next question, which we are dealing with. What is cultural humility? I'm very interested in seeing everyone's responses. We've learned a lot about culture. but what exactly does cultural humility mean? Lifelong learning? Understanding someone else's? So for those of you that have never done this before, they make the words that are being used most often, they make them bigger. So you're seeing learning, learn, understand. These are some awesome ideas, some awesome answers that we're dealing with. All right. Going back to our presentation. Now we're looking at what is the difference between cultural competency versus cultural humility. So for those of you that have been doing this for a while, that have been in advocacy services, there was that term cultural competency that's been going around for years. But that doesn't actually encompass what we do and how we practice our services with survivors. Cultural competency is essentially saying that you are competent, you are an expert in culture. But in all actuality, we're not ever going to be quote unquote experts in a culture. We always have to keep learning. But rather, cultural humility, on the other hand, is putting the power in the survivor's hands, is telling them, you are the expert in your culture. You are the expert in your situation, which sounds more aligned with what advocates typically do with clients. Cultural competency implies mastery, applies that there is a limit that you can hit. But cultural humility, as a lot of you pointed out in this poll, is always a process. It's always learning. It's a lifelong learning that you're always going to have, because we're never going to understand somebody's situation 100%. I've worked with the Arabic and I've worked with the Nepali community for years. And I still am shocked by some of the things our advocates from those communities say that I just don't know. It's a lifelong learning. Again, culture is always evolving. It's always changing. Things are always changing. But the idea of cultural competency is that there is a limit, there is a staticness about culture in general. But as we all know, culture changes, it's dynamic, and we're always going to have to keep learning. So again, it's this idea that we are always going to have to keep learning and putting the power back in the survivor for them to explain their situation to us. So I won't go into much detail about this, but the cultural humility model is a model that we kind of live by here in the Ahimsa department, in understanding the how culture can impact in the different levels of what culture looks like, and being humble to that fact. The idea that identity is who you are, and then the primary identity going more towards your gender identity, your gender, your race, things you can't necessarily change about you, your age. And then secondary is kind of more about, as you go out, it's things of less choosing for you, things that you're kind of just put into the situation of your surroundings. I can send this to everybody though, to learn a little bit more about this, but for respect of time, I would like to move forward. Go ahead, Monicah.
So there are some of the things that we need to consider, when we're working with survivors. So, like next slide, please. So like when we talk to them, or when we, meet with the individuals, so how and why we ask the, specific information is important than what you ask. So always let them know why you are asking and why it is important than what you ask. So So sometimes the clients, they are like, why you're asking me this, so let them explain to them that, you need this information for a specific reason, because, you got to make sure that the client feels comfortable telling those, specific information to you. So, and, like, uh, so empathy and, show them that you were willing to learn about their culture, about their backgrounds, about their, victimizations, so inform what you like, which, inform the client that what you need the information is for, explain them. That's very important, you know, about like, talk to them about like a confidentiality, like you don't share this kind of, stuff to other third party, like, make sure that, they feel comfortable sharing the information. So don't assume, like when you're dealing with immigrant refugees survivors, don't assume, about their, cultures, like, all Nepali speaking people, they have same culture, same religion, stuff like that, because like it could be harmful. So like all ethnicity or language based in the country of origin, like all Burmese, people, like Burmese speaking clans, they have the same religion, the same, like tradition and stuff like that, because that's not true, like, so that's why I always ask. So as an immigrant myself, like I'm more than happy to, like answer your question about what I know about my culture, so then somebody's making an assumption about me or my culture that, sometimes it can be, not true. So that's why I always, ask questions. So, and we're more than happy to, happy to, talk about it. So, um, like if you don't know, like, before meeting with this individual, like, use the language identification booklets or card, like that's like Ohio Department of Safety. Just do a little bit research before you're meeting this, like individuals, so that gives you a little bit of idea, if it's your first time, especially, or like every time you meet, sometimes we meet different backgrounds individuals. So, because I know a little bit about that in Nepali because I'm from that community, but I could be meeting this individual, but different religion, so I have to be aware of that, so that gives me a little bit of, and then I, how to be, how I can best serve this individual, so because I don't want to say something that I believe in, that, we're from the same culture doesn't mean she has the same belief or he has the same, belief as I do. So, um, so, so like don't expect individuals to speak for their identity group. So again, like each individual is different. So, I like all, like for example, all Nepali people, like women are like very, submissive to their husband, it depends on, again, individual, but like survivors, they are, because, usually the culture has a big effect, and also, other things. So, like meet clients where they are at, like it doesn't mean like it has to be physically, like, just be aware of their unique barriers that, special population face, to find a ways to adapt to their needs, like rather expect them to immediately come to you for help or something like that, like, there's a way to doing things, how to best serve them, like, try to find a way how to best serve them, like, you understanding, like, the barriers that these individuals face, like there's already language language barriers, transportation, and how do we better serve these individuals, just be open-minded and just, um, like learn a little bit back, about their backgrounds. So
So the thing is that if you haven't caught on, the idea is that the power and the knowledge is with the client, and understanding each individual's own unique, as they're unique in their own right. It's very common for people to identify women who are covered as Muslim women. but that's not always necessarily true. There's a lot of different cultures where women cover their heads. So these are things that you might understand or you might think is a stereotype, but it's not necessarily true. You're taking that decision and that power out of them by coming up with an assumption. So give that back to them. And acknowledge the barrier of oppression in general. Where in this individual's life are they being oppressed? Because a lot of the times it might be in multiple areas. The fact if you don't have language access, that's a form of oppression. You can't report things. You can't do things if you can't communicate with people. If your perpetrator is somebody within your family or somebody within your community, and your community, we had a client who the survivor was a rape victim of their community leader. That's somebody who you're supposed to be turning to for everything. How are you supposed to report something like that? So just understand that there are multiple layers of oppression a lot of immigrant and refugee survivors are facing, and being able to acknowledge that. And then acknowledging the fact that being born in America gives you a US citizenship. And that sounds very basic, but in all actuality, that's where a lot of that power dynamic is occurring within the immigrant refugee communities. It's from US citizens versus non-US citizens. And it not only acknowledging, but appreciating that culture has both positive and negative aspects when you're trying to provide services to survivors. Culture can be something that we talked before, can help with pride, can help with belongingness and your identity. But at the same time, it is a lot of culture that is holding people back from wanting to move forward or get away from a certain circumstance. So it's not our job to judge, but it is our job to explain different paths and options to survivors. And in order to give them different options and explain those options, we need to appreciate where the barriers are, where are their struggles that they're facing right now on all aspects of their lives. And again, understanding that culture changes. It's dynamic, it's not stagnant. And that is extremely important when a survivor is trying to make determinations in their lives.
So, like, as an victim advocate, our goal is like always to help this individual to become self-sufficient. So empowering, plays a very big role. So empowering is very important. Like, when you like take some time with consent form and confidentiality like stuff, like a form, like when you're meeting with a client, because let them know, make them feel comfortable, because it's very important. I mean, like why you ask a question and stuff like that I talked about earlier, like check for understanding like frequently, because especially when you're dealing with different cultures that you are not part of, so like don't make assumption again, like ask question, and like, so inform the survivor your agency's policy on mandatory reporting, because like most of our immigrant and refugee individuals that we serve, like they have no idea, because they also freak out, like they're afraid, like then they stop asking for help. So but inform them about you know like make them understand, like you're the mandatory reporter, but there's some exception. So so there are like there's are some laws like revolving around that go through like with your own organization. So could you Sam, could you please talk about that really quick?
Yeah, I mean, we have about 7 minutes left, everybody. So I kind of want to hurry through most of this.
Okay.
noting that again, laws change, organization structure changes, and we want to make sure that we're consistent in the services that we're able to provide in understanding that mandatory reporting, and understanding what type of mandatory reporting or confidentiality might apply to your agency. We need to make sure it is very apparent that we're not making false assurances to these survivors. They don't want to hear that, yes, everything you want is correct, because that's not practical. At the end of the day, there might be some ups and downs, but most of you guys who are advocates here, probably you guys all know that you can't be, you have to be honest as to what it might look like to go through a certain path. And again, the idea that a lot of our clients might be hesitant in working with authority figures such as law enforcement, such as the courts, and appreciating that hesitancy and where they're coming from and being by their side if they do choose to want to go forward that way, or if they don't, and some other options they can have. And then at the end of the day, again, we need to give that power back to the survivors in the fact of understanding where they're coming from, what the knowledge is of their background, of their culture, and giving them options to make sure they're making informed decisions by what is best for them. So I quickly want to go through this in working with interpreters and translators for the immigrant refugee communities, because this is something a lot of agencies lack or don't understand. Monica, you want to start?
Sure. So, like, for example, like in Nepal, like, all Nepali people don't speak the same dialect again, like, make sure like the interpreter that, if the client needs an interpreter, make sure like, pick the one that is suitable for her, like the same dialect that they speak. So, like recognize the home dialect versus like, what the majority of people speaks, and then there could, understand that there's a dialectical like a differences, even though they all speak Nepali, but little some dialect could be different, and it could make it very it could impact the clients, or survivors like testimony or like a court hearing, things like that. So or like don't default based on the assumption again, like we keep going back to that, just ask, or ask client like what do you speak, what like Nepali doesn't mean like, there has like Nepali doesn't mean like there's again like a simplest term, like understanding about the client's background, like how simple, like most of our clients like immigrant refugee survivors, they speak only like a basic Nepali. So when we provide the interpreters, some interpreters you tend to use like a very big words where client can't understand. So make understand about that, be aware of that. So use like I speak card again on your desk, and then have client write, or tell you what language that person speaks. So find a good fit interpreter whenever possible, like make sure like the client understand what the interpreter is saying, when you're using the interpreter. So gender, location, so speak of interpreters not working. So sometimes you'll be able to tell like, or at least sometime for here in the OAESV department, I am as an advocate, so I play an advocate role. And then again, when we use the Nepali interpreter, like I find it like there's an error and stuff like that. So, but Sam will not be able to tell, like, if the interpreter made an error or something like that. So, I, let Sam know right away, because if that could jeopardize the whole case, so we don't want to do that. So, try, be aware of that as well. And like, going to court, like allow extra time if possible to make sure the clients and interpreter have like a chance to meet. So sometimes like doing that, like, what language or how like how big word the interpreter is going to use, and what client is able to understand. So make sure, allow that time to meet with the interpreters and client, like before they go, meet. And make sure there are two interpreters available, like one for survivor and one for perpetrator. The reason being is because the interpreter could be biased, because like especially the Nepali culture, like where it's like men, you know, like, oh my goodness, I can't say the word.
When you have a male interpreter for a female survivor, sometimes there might be a bias in the culture itself that a male will favor a male over a female. So just taking those into considerations. And then again, working with limited English speaking individuals in general, best practice, don't use their family. Please just don't use their family. If there's no other options, then yes. But survivors do not want to disclose a lot of a rape in front of their child who's interpreting for them right now. We have to be cognizant of putting ourselves in the survivor's situation before we're expecting them to give us information. And again, encourage clients to carry the I Speak cards. It just helps in general for everyday practice. If you need an example, you are more than welcome to contact us and we can show you an example. But also, you know, Monicah, we're very blessed to have a bilingual advocate with us, but she is not an interpreter. Her job is to be an advocate. And so we need to make sure we're making that differentiation between who are advocates versus who are interpreters and what their jobs actually require. I know we're at the 12 o'clock, but I do want everyone to know in your Zoom, I'm going to stop sharing. In the Zoom chat, there is a document that I have uploaded. That's an evaluation. I would like all of you guys to download that and take the evaluation. This is to see how cultural humility is practiced, if it is practiced within your agency, and things you can do to help with that. I know we kind of had to rush towards the end. I know this is a lot of information, and I appreciate everyone and your time and energy spent here today. But I'm going to put my email in the chat. If anyone would like to have any questions or like any additional information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you all so much for your time, and I'm super excited to see how the rest of this conference goes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers and participants. I would like to share the code word for today. The code word for your CEU and CLE credits is advocacy. The code word for your credits is advocacy. I will put that in the chat for everyone. You are now entering your lunch break. We are on a break from this point until 1 p.m. And please again refer to oaesv.org/2021 conference program for join links for this afternoon. So your code word I am entering now is advocacy, and the link to your join programs for this afternoon is oaesv.org/2021 conference program. And we will see all of you back at 1 o'clock. Thank you so much.